Welcome to another episode of Coffee with Convery, where we bring you conversations with remarkable individuals shaping the landscape of work and impacting people through storytelling. Today, we are thrilled to have Kevin O'Keefe on the show, a seasoned veteran in the world of current affairs, television documentaries, and digital media. With a career spanning over 25 years, Kevin has left an indelible mark on the industry. Currently serving as a producer at CTV's acclaimed investigative series W5, Kevin's work delves into the crucial issues and events showcasing his dedication to uncovering compelling stories. Beyond his extensive professional achievements, Kevin is a lifelong learner. Armed with a Bachelor of Arts, Applied Arts in Radio and Television from Toronto Metropolitan University and a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology from the University of King's College, he continues to hone his craft. His commitment to excellence extends even to his personal pursuits, having completed the improvisation program at Second City Training Center and a Japanese language course at the Japanese Canadian Culture Center. Incredible journey you've been on, Kevin. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
I'm really excited, and maybe we could start with a few rapid fire questions just to warm up and share a little bit about you with the audience.
Sure, I'll try not to talk too much.
That's
I'll try to
okay.
give you short answers. Is challenge for people in broadcasting. But go for it.
That's okay. What are your pronouns?
He, him.
And superpower, what's your superpower?
Swimming. I can
Swimming.
explain. Yes, I'm a swimmer. Um, the thing I love about it is no matter how stressful your day is, no matter how frustrated you are about aspects of your life, I know I can get in the water for an hour and feel amazing afterwards. And the things that were bugging me or affecting me so much have all been put back into context. So I think it's a superpower.
Wow, I love that. I think you're my
Yeah.
first swimming superpower. Yes, you
Mm.
are. Um, Favorite smell?
Lilacs. I grew up in Nova Scotia, and there was a lilac tree outside my window, and it flowered mid-May, which meant end of school, and my birthday is the end of May. So my birthday was coming, and school was almost over. So I still associate that smell.
I love that. Um, Thinking about, feedback and comments and compliments, what is the best compliment you ever received?
I just finished a story on international students, and we talked. I mean, these are, and this has been in the news lately.
Absolutely.
One of the women we interviewed that was housing some homeless international students said, "Yeah, the in the interviews we were very kind," and I thought that was a nice compliment that I was kind because, in the fast-paced craziness of deadlines, whatever, sometimes you can, okay, let's go, but he
Yeah,
said I treated everyone very well and I was very kind to them. I thought that was a good compliment.
that's a great compliment. And thank you for featuring such an important topic these days, and
Mm.
especially thinking about this audience and how many international students might
Mm.
be listening.
Yeah.
Um, what's your go-to snack?
Avis Favreau, the medical reporter at CTV, hooked me on brand buds because we all have high cholesterol. So blueberries, which are anti-inflammatory, low-fat yogurt, and brand buds.
Nice, nice. Healthy alternative
Yes,
there.
yes.
Yeah. Um, Thinking about school, and it doesn't have to be necessarily university or post-secondary, or it could be high school. What was your favorite subject overall in school?
I think documentary making when I was at Toronto Metropolitan University, news and documentary production,
Yeah, I can't wait to talk
for
more about
obvious
that.
reasons.
Yeah, okay, of course. I can't wait to talk more about that. It's intriguing. Um, we all started somewhere, and whether it was mowing lawns, babysitting, or whatever we did, what was your very first job?
I worked as a recreation supervisor for a children's program in Sydney, Nova Scotia, in a playground when I was 16.
Ah, interesting.
Mm.
Interesting. If you had to pick just one word to describe yourself, what would it be?
I was going to say I'm indescribable, but people have already said that. I would say perspicacious, which is I had a French teacher, Mr. Forgeron, in high school, and he used to always say the perspicacious student. That's what we used to call us. So I always use that word perspicacious, which just means like keen and hungry for knowledge. So
That's awesome.
the
That's a
salute to
good word.
Mr.
Hey,
Forgeron as well.
that there you go. Shout out to him. All
Yeah.
right, so let's jump in. So your journey in the media industry spans well over 25 years, numerous awards, recognitions. Can you take us and the audience back to the beginning? Like, what sparked your interest in current affairs television, documentaries, and how did you kind of navigate from where your beginnings were to where you are today?
How much time have you got?
I don't know. But let's go back.
I would
Let's
just,
start back
I
where you
would
were
say
born.
I'll start at Ryerson, or Toronto Metropolitan University, as it's called now. It was just the documentary making that really fascinated me. Um, just the storytelling approach. I still learn every day the most compelling way to tell stories. The thing I really loved about it, I mean, unlike fiction, where you can create any world you want with as many characters you want, we're kind of like I like that containment of we have a limited, like, for example, I did a story on medical assistance in dying. And, I have to find a doctor, I have to find somebody who wants to die, I have to find a family member. Like, there are certain key ingredients I need to tell this story. So I have to find those elements, and then I have to create a story with a beginning, middle, and end.
Mm.
So it's kind of like a puzzle, and I put all the pieces of the puzzle together to create a really compelling story. So you have to kind of think of what's the person's motivation to do this. But I have to ask them about, so kind of like there's an investigative undercover, or kind of just trying to explore people's motivations. And I'm kind of like a philosopher slash psychologist of,
Yeah.
what is it about this topic that would motivate someone to do this? And as well, I just love I can ask people in journalism questions I would never ask them as myself, because you have a license to do that. Because, oh, it's Kevin O'Keefe calling from W5. I wonder if I could talk to you about medical assistance in dying. Sure. Tell me what's the most significant thing that happened in your life, blah, blah. And they go, well, it's like, I would never go up and say that to a stranger.
Right.
So I think I really got excited about the drama in terms of being able to tell a really compelling story and the best way to do it, and putting the pieces together and trying to decode a person's motivation. Sometimes they don't even know what their motivation is. Like, remember I interviewed this guy once, young South Asian man who was working to save the world. He worked at the United Nations doing all this stuff. And I kept trying to feel like, why would somebody, like, he was from Bangladesh, leave Bangladesh, move to New York, work at the UN, he's running all these programs for youth. And he kept saying, oh, I really just want to empower, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that's still like, I love the idea you have to trust your gut. And I was like, that doesn't, like, I wouldn't move away
Yeah.
halfway around the world and give up my life to do that. And he said, oh, during the war in Bangladesh, my mother was dismembered into 17 pieces on our front lawn.
Wow.
I was like, as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, okay. And
Wow.
it's fascinating too why I've interviewed people where they go one direction, which is, no jury in the world would convict them, become the most bitter, miserable person on the planet. And other people somehow transcend that experience to want to prevent that from ever happening again to somebody else. And he was one of those people. So I just love all those elements in my job.
That's so cool. And thank goodness we have people like the latter there that want to make that turn that into
Yeah,
good.
I would love to do a series on that. Like, people, I'm sure there are out there, like, who face that one pivotal moment in their life,
Yeah.
and somehow they're able to turn it into good. And yeah, there's some people that don't, but I would love to know. I don't know,
Especially
maybe it's
today.
DNA or
Especially
yeah,
today in the
especially
news,
today.
it'd be great to do that. I got to ask you though, going back to when you were a kid, were you intrigued by storytelling then and interested in that kind of like, kind of concept, or were you
I
good
think
at it?
so. I
Yeah.
I grew up on Cape Breton Island,
Okay.
which is very kind of rich in Scottish, Irish, and then in Sydney, there was a steel plant, so there were tons of people coming from across Europe and Africa, and so it was quite a diverse, interesting population. I remember I interviewed Anne-Marie MacDonald once, the author of Fall on Your Knees,
Hmm.
and she talked about growing up in the Maritimes and just this rich culture of storytelling and elaborate, like, side stories, and like just this very complex. So I think definitely storytelling was, and she even describes it, Emery McDonald, as like she heard all these stories about her family, and then they would come to visit. And she said it was like, a rock star came because this is Mary so and so who lived here and did all these things, and she was like
Right.
so encapsulated by this celebrity in her mind that came into her house. So I think definitely, yeah, storytelling was a huge part of growing up, and a good storyteller that could command the room at a party was like the most popular person in the room. So I think
Yep.
it's funny because my husband is Japanese, and the most powerful person in Japan is the quietest. So it's always an interesting struggle where he lived in the US for about 15 years. And he said, I always felt like I was yelling in that country because, some US would argue that the loudest person in the room is the most powerful. So, it makes for an interesting dynamic sometimes.
Oh, I can only imagine. That's really interesting. So over the years, congratulations. I mean, so many accolades that you've achieved. And thinking about those formal recognitions, how has that impacted your approach to work? Do you continue to find, and how do you find that inspiration and motivation in this dynamic field that you're in?
It's so funny. One of my mentors, John Scully, said to me, it wasn't that long ago, he said, never produce a story to win an award. John was one of these crusty, I'm sure he'd appreciate this description of like crusty old journalist who's like in the trenches. And I have so much respect for him and trust his judgment so well. He was an amazing mentor. But his big thing is, and again, like, yeah, I get it. You never want to produce, I mean, the awards
Right.
are nice, but that's never your motivation. And that was why he was totally against award shows. I think it gets back to me, and I mean, we just won an RTDNA, Radio and Television Digital Media Association Award for the Death Wish, the story I did on medical assistance in dying. And, it was just nice to be in a room. I think, you mentioned a bit about the climate and the environment we're in right now, especially in
Yeah.
media where there's layoffs almost every day in the news. So it was nice to be in a room of people who are motivated and excited about their work. That was good. And I think to me, it just gets back to this license that I can have these very intimate conversations with people. We're lucky at W5 to have the luxury in this day and age to have the time to really build trust and get to know people. Um, so I love that ability to be in a room. I'll get back to the assistance in dying when somebody's going to die. Like they died in front of me. We filmed the whole thing, and this
Wow.
was the last thing he was going to do. And he said to us, it's one of these things where I don't know, God, I have to find someone who's dying and let us film it. How am I going to do that? But the doctor who we work with found someone in the end, and he was so happy that we did that. And I thought, oh my God, like he's spending the last day of his life with me and my cameraman Kirk. And I'm like, the poor man.
Yeah.
But he said, like, he was a second time he had terminal cancer, having terminal cancer. The first time he had it, he was part of a big experimental study in Vancouver at UBC, and it was a success. And he thought, oh, that's the reason why I was cured, was because I could help other people. And then when Stephanie, the physician we work with, said, would you be on camera when you die? He said, oh, that's the reason I'm dying, is because I want to show people not to be afraid and that this is a wonderful
Wow.
way to. So, so just to have access to those experiences. Again, in my personal life, I would never in a million years say, oh, you're dying. Can I spend the last day of your life with you? But
Yeah,
as a
absolutely.
journalist, I can. And they go, sure, come on over. And I'm like, it was just such a beautiful, and I still, his wife is still a friend of mine. And she sent me a Christmas card this year. And she was in Ontario last year visiting relatives. We got together for dinner, and you just like have a license to have access to these amazing people and develop these. I'm still friends with people I interviewed 20 years ago.
Wow.
So
What an
yeah,
amazing life experience for you too, and the insights to gain, even the learnings from the experiences you're having, and people wouldn't have that
yeah, and
opened up to, as you
I
said.
get paid to do that.
Right,
I get
exactly.
paid to learn. Like I get paid to have these experiences and learn, which is a pretty cool job.
That's pretty cool. So thinking about your educational journey and thinking about some of the audience here who's maybe at school or getting ready to like sign up and go to school, your background includes a Bachelor of Applied Arts in radio and television. Thinking about that, how has that academic foundation influenced your career? And what do you believe continuous learning continues to your success? How is that evolving in the land of media?
So funny, before you started rolling, we were talking about our getting into university, and I forget your reason, but I like the residence, so that's why I chose. Like
Yeah,
so often, we don't. We make that's I think why this podcast is so important because we make these sometimes the most important decisions in your life takes you down this path kind of almost subconsciously. We just go, oh, that's a cool thing. I guess I'll try that. I think especially like what I learned at Ryerson or TMU was, how to load a 1 inch tape player into a machine, which immediately became irrelevant when I graduated. And then I was filming on tape, which is now irrelevant. Like I'm on a shoot right now, and everything goes on these little cards. Um, then I learned nonlinear editing, which is totally irrelevant now. Like, so I think in this, I guess you could say it for any position, but definitely in media where the technology, like I'm on a shoot today, and my cameraman Kirk said he just bought brand new audio equipment Sunday, and we're meeting at 11:30. He's currently testing it right now. Um, there was a time when uh, if we were doing a double ender, we call them, say, for example, I just shot on Friday, I had a guest in Milwaukee, reporter in Hamilton, guest in Ottawa. We did the whole interview over Zoom with cameras in each location. Like the technology is changing so quickly, and
yeah,
storytelling is storytelling.
right.
That's in, I believe, cavemen were
Yeah,
storytelling on the side of their caves.
absolutely.
Um, that will never change. I think that's innate. Some people are better at it than others, but I think storytelling, we all tell stories innately, good stories. Um, but the way to do it, and now we have, of course, social media, and we have 15-second story or a 3-second story. So I think you have to be flexible. And if you're not, I mean, dinosaur is gonna die pretty fast. So especially in this where, I work at CTV, Bell Media. We're a big media organization in Canada. Um, and sometimes more people will see a story on YouTube than they will on a Saturday broadcast. Okay, so where are your priorities now?
Right.
And then in Canada, our audience is Canadian. On YouTube, our audience is the world. So how does that affect our storytelling? I think of 60 Minutes Australia, which I'm a big fan of. And if you look at their content, quite often it's not about Australia. It's just a big topic happening somewhere in the world. Maybe they'll have an Australian on, maybe they won't. So I think that's another thing is we just have to be mindful of who our audience is and how the technology is radically shaping this almost on a daily basis.
Yeah, and we sometimes, it's why I have yourself here today is because opening up these ideas that, sometimes when people talk about technology and changes and they think immediately like business, right? Or what's it doing? But
Mhm.
it's all industries and you're exactly
Exactly.
right. Like it's so interesting and how rapidly the changes are happening. And even the gentleman who's gonna do this thing at 11:30, learning the equipment
Yeah,
now, talk about being
yeah,
agile and quick on your feet, right?
yeah,
Like
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
that's interesting. Hey, I love that you did the Second City Training Center. You're another one of my friends did that, and I went to see
Yeah.
him, and it was really fun. And I know about three guys right now that are thinking about going and doing it together. So how was it? Like, what was it like when you did it?
It was amazing, actually, and I still have friends from that. Linda Stevenson is working on this story on a factory in northern Quebec, and we're doing some testing. And I just had dinner with her on Friday, and she's a chemist in her real life, her day job, and she was helping me analyze some of the data from that study. So I think it's just, and you know, you can joke about this, but improv is all about yes and. So when the idea throws at you, yes, and you build on it.
Right.
And you can apply that to every aspect of your life and just do it for fun. Like someday when you're with someone, and some people, whatever, early childhood trauma, uh, they block constantly. And those people are so difficult to work with. So an example is like, you know, oh, I'm going, you know, we have a shoot at 11:30. No, I don't think that's a good idea. I think, and then immediately it becomes kind of a combative approach. And you can literally say the same thing with a yes and. So I should, oh, yes, and just so you know, I have this interview with Brian at 10, so I may be a few minutes late, but I'll make sure, you know, like, and
Yeah.
right away you have this open path to uh, communicate effectively. And just like I always
Interesting.
sometimes when I try and be mindful of that when I'm interviewing somebody, to you have to make John Scully told me you have to put them in a cocoon of safety. That's your job as an interviewer, is to wrap the person in a cocoon of safety
Huh.
so that no matter what I say to you, you're going to be safe. Because the
Yeah.
minute you make someone feel unsafe, they're not going to open up to you. So you have to kind of draw them out. Doesn't mean you're going to challenge them. You are going to ask challenging, difficult questions. That's your job, but you're not going to do something that's going to make them feel unsafe, because as soon as they feel unsafe, then they shut down or they're resistant to answer your questions. So I think the improv stuff definitely still applies to that in my professional and my personal life.
It's really interesting and some great takeaways and insights for others who are considering
Mm.
putting them out there and trying it, going out of your
Just
comfort
try it as
zone.
an experiment. Go into a
Yeah.
meeting and just instead of just look, watch the people around the room, and some go, "No, that'll never work. I don't think." And then immediately, "Yeah, I think it'll work." And right away, you're off. You know, as
Yeah.
opposed to, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea. What also? What do you think of this? If we added this in?" And then right away, the people are much more receptive. It's
Absolutely.
interesting.
Absolutely. What a
Yeah.
cool crossover. So, advice for aspiring media professionals. What do you think? What would you share with some people thinking about going into the career and the futures of working in media? Some advice or thoughts you might have to share.
Don't do it. It's awful.
It
uh,
looks so
I was
glamorous on the outside,
Yeah,
right? So,
exactly. Yeah, yeah. I'm sitting in my glamorous hotel room in Montreal right now. I had a professor at Toronto Metropolitan University, Jerry Good, who said to me once, "Do what you love, and the money will come later." And
mhm,
it's so funny because growing up in Nova Scotia and coming from a, you know, an economically depressed region of the country, I think part of my DNA is always to have a job, have a backup plan, have a plan B, have a plan C. But I think honestly, I have lived by that motto as much as I can, even though I have a mortgage and a dog I have to take care of. I think that when I started my career over 25 years ago as a Vision TV and working with Rita Deverell, who is another one of the big mentors in my life. And she hired me on a 30-week contract. And I remember telling my parents, like, and I was
mhm,
full time at the time, working just doing admin stuff, and I really wanted to get into production. And it was, funnily enough, one of my goals, Rita Deverell and Sandy Ronaldo, Sandy doesn't know this, came to lecture when I was a student at TMU. And my goal was to work with both of those people at some point in my life. I've never told Sandy this, I should tell her. And I'm working with Sandy now, and I work with Rita then. And I signed a 30-week contract, and I had a job there for 15 years, which is unheard of in this industry. So my 30-week contract turned into a 15-year amazing learning experience. So I would, you know, there is some glamour involved, but it's a difficult job. It's a challenging job. It doesn't care how long you spend researching and building your story. If it
mhm.
sucks, it sucks. That's the beauty of television. It's either a really good story, an okay story, or a shitty story. And I could have spent 6 months on this story, and I think it's the most amazing thing on the planet. And you look at it and go, "Oh, it's okay. It's a little boring." So it's kind of the great equalizer. But I
Yeah.
think you really have to love it to want to do it for the long term. And I think if you're just doing you're not, because it's your creativity, it's your personal, the way you see the world and your reflections. It's such a personal, in some ways, process, because I'll be in the shower and I'll think, oh, that's a good way to introduce that story. I'll start with her jogging, and she'll talk about how she's trying to escape the problems in her life, and we'll film it with a drone. And so it's such a personal process that I really think you have to love it
I
to
love that there's
want to do it.
shower moments too, where these ideas come to you.
I don't
That's
know what it is, like, and swimming too.
swimming too.
It
It's
has something with
water.
water.
It's water.
Maybe
You
I
and
grew up
water.
on I grew
Maybe
up
you
on the East
were
Coast, so I'm
a
used to
fish in
things.
another life. Maybe that's it.
Yeah. I call them ocean people.
Ocean
Like on the
people.
East Coast and West Coast, I just
Yeah.
think they're more mellow. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I love being near water. I think that's why I love Toronto too, just even with the lake.
Oh,
If I didn't have that, I
mm,
don't think it would be, I don't know.
mm,
I find a lot of, I don't swim, but I just find peace being around water. But
mm,
I know
mhm,
like the theme in a lot of conversations here, we're talking about storytelling, and I think it's so relevant to people looking for jobs and trying to stand out. And a lot of times I spend time coaching people on their narrative and thinking about how do you tell your story a little differently to get attention. And people are not always that comfortable talking about themselves, so sometimes they're
mm,
a little bit reserved or they downplay something. And I always say, well, if you're trying to get a job, you need to stand out. So
mm,
storytelling is something that, is super important, but it also is a skill, right? So
mm,
how have you learned to craft these compelling narratives that resonate? Because I think that could be a transferable thing from this podcast to a lot of people that are listening and saying,
mm.
okay, well, maybe I can take that and talk about my experience in a different way and get that career or that job.
I think storytelling is innate. I think that cavemen were good storytellers, but I think you're right. When people get the pressure of an interview or a new job or meeting a new relationship or meeting someone at work for the first time, they get kind of overwhelmed with stuff and they lose that innate ability that I think we all have. I think one thing that took me a while to figure out, but it feels like a bit of an oxymoron, but the more personal you are in your storytelling, the more universal it becomes. So sometimes we
Ah,
try and
yeah.
not want to exclude something. We'll say, well, we try and keep it generic. Like, it was really interesting to do a story on medical assistance in dying. It affects, over whatever 7,000 people in Canada last year, and it's a really, it affects medical people and personal. Or I could say, um, the moment that man pushed the syringe into his arm and took his last breath was the most poignant and intimate experience I've ever. So I was very specific about that experience, yet I
Yes.
suspect that resonated much more than if I just try and encapsulate as much information and be as generic as possible. Because everybody immediately connects with the central character in your story being you. Because I
Yes.
remember a time when it was difficult for me, or I remember a time when it was hard for me. So I know, just to me, that's something it took me a while to figure out, that, this the story I'm working on now, actually, that's a real example of a woman jogging, and she lives next to this factory that creates a lot of pollution, and she jogs every morning to escape her
Mm,
mind because she's so concerned about the pollution, and it weighs so heavy on her that exercise and running is a way of not having to think about it. But she's also escaping the reality, which is there's a lot of pollution in her neighborhood. So we try and keep it as personal as we can to make it as accessible to everyone as possible. And then, because I work in television, which is a visual medium, when I worked at Vision TV, John Scully, who was our senior producer, we use the term B-roll a lot, which is just the visuals of someone doing something. So your
hmm.
A-roll is the actual interview, like what we're having now, and then B-roll is a shot of me unpacking and putting my tapes away and doing whatever. He banned that word from the office. We weren't allowed to use the word B-roll. We had to use the term visual proof. So if you're doing a story on, and the interesting thing I learned too is your eyes override your ears in a story. So if I say to you, nobody showed up today for the big rally, but the visual you see is a bunch of people standing at the rally. And I say to you after, what did you think of that story? You go, oh, there was a bunch of people at the rally. And I said, no, I said there was no people at the rally. So your eyes saw people and shut down your ears. So if you're telling a story using visuals, your visuals better back up what the audio is. Otherwise, you want your ears, well, your visual override your ears. So if I'm doing a story on medical assistance in dying, I have to see someone die because that's the story. I have to have a visual of the person putting the syringe in their arm and passing away to create a compelling story. You have to see that. Otherwise, you don't have a story. We use a term at work like a think piece or a print piece, which is that would make a great people sitting around debating it, or it would make a great story to write in print, but for TV or a visual like Instagram or Facebook, where you're posting a video, you have to actually see, to my opinion, create a really compelling story, see what you're saying. You have to show the visual proof of what you're saying. Otherwise, it's not as compelling.
It's interesting, and I'm thinking about as you're describing that, how you might, because you're a storyteller, right? Obviously, that's what you do, but when you're interviewing people, some people might not be comfortable, and you have to obviously, like you said, build the trust, open that all up. I'm thinking of the same thing where students are sitting on the other side of the desk and I'm interviewing them for an opportunity. I'm trying to get them to tell me their story and tell me their narrative.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening sometimes is a regurgitation of the resume. And I'm like, no, I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell me a
Mm-hmm.
time that you,
Mm-hmm.
what would your thoughts be if you looked at, like, if you were in my shoes trying to get these young
Mm-hmm.
people to tell something different about themselves, because that's what I'm going to bring to the hiring manager to say, hey, you saw all these people, but this person, how do you get people to talk?
It's amazing. Like, reminds me of my husband who works for Muji Canada, which is a Japanese retail company.
Hmm.
And he's an architect by trade, and he's got all this business experience. He's run businesses. And I remember when he had the interview, I'm sure he's okay with me telling this, he was the first person hired at Muji Canada.
Yep.
Um, and he became really good friends with his boss. And several years later, asked his boss, like, why did you hire me? Was it because he's also bilingual, so he can
Sure.
simultaneously translate Japanese and English, which at one point all the presidents didn't speak English in Canada, so he did all that as well. And so he had all these very marketable skills that qualified him for the position. And he said to his boss, like, why did you hire me in the end? He said, oh, because you had a Muji bike when you were a teenager. And he
I
told
see.
them in the interview, he said, why do you like the company? He said, oh, I had Muji bike. Like, it was my favorite bike. I used to ride it to school when I was in junior high. And one Christmas, my sister got me Muji pencil crayons. And so I used to color with them. And because he said, like, well, I can train you to do all those things. I can train you to do a spreadsheet. I can train you to do whatever, but I can't train you to have passion for the company and for the brand. You
That's
just have
right.
to have that innately. You have to want. So it was funny, yeah. So I guess I always think of that story as, again, that's a very personal. Oh, I don't want to bother in the interview with saying a personal story about me riding a bike in junior high. But he said, and he had to go after that through two other levels of the interview and testing and
Yeah.
writing in English and Japanese, whatever. And his boss said, "Oh, as soon as you said you're the Muzi bike, you had the job." And the
See,
hospital was like, why did I have to go through three more levels of, he said, well, that's the process we followed. But as soon as you said you had a bike, you had the job.
the passion was there for the brand, the company, but he also humanized the story, right? To someone who was probably, I don't know, because after you interview a bunch of people, you're looking for that spark, right?
Exactly. What's going to stand out? Yeah.
And not being
Yeah.
so robotic. But I know people get nervous. I know people, but this part of this podcast, I think, is really important for the listeners too, because they can think differently about how they walk into that room. Maybe they need to talk about that bike ride, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it,
Yeah.
I I
What's
get
going to
it.
make you stand out? Yeah. And it was like, it was a true story. That's what
That's
and he
right.
never, when he's preparing for the interview, that was not his part of his approach, but he just was really honest. And I guess, yeah, that, as you say, like that really resonated with his boss and that stood him out from everybody else.
Absolutely. So for listeners, take note of that one. I know it's a tough market out there. So let's jump ahead to the LGBTQ community and the Pink Triangle Press. I was reading up on that about you, and I noticed that, of course, being part of the community, can you share your experiences and insights to how this aspect of your identity has influenced your career and stories that you choose to tell? And maybe a little bit more context, what about the Pink Triangle Presses and the documentary series that I think it explores aftermaths of natural disasters, if I read that correctly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
sure.
I think, well, to be brief, I think it probably gives me a sense of what it's like to be an outsider. I mean, I grew up in the 70s and 80s
Mm,
where being gay was almost a death sentence with HIV/AIDS.
yeah.
My brother is a HIV/AIDS specialist, coincidentally, in Toronto during the uh, that era, where all his patients died. Everybody died. He had
Uh,
165 patients. They all died. That was his job. So that definitely gave you a sense of, it was interesting too with COVID, like, I don't know, just like, I mean, a lot of my friends are gay. I belong to a gay swim club, and I wondered, like, we're not freaking out as much. I don't know, like, we're used to having a virus that can kill us for
it's
being who
true.
we are.
Yeah.
Um, so I think I bring that into my work when I'm talking with people who, I'm asking them often to share the most intimate details of their life and what they're going through on camera so that everyone else can see it. And I learned too that everybody just wants to be heard. I used to try and think, oh, my job is to somehow solve their problem. And then I realized I am solving it by just giving them a voice and letting, I know it sounds a little trite, but it's true
Oh,
that people just want someone to listen to them and
sure.
be heard. This series I did for Pink Triangle on what happens to the LGBT community after natural disaster, like an earthquake, hurricane, or flood, was really fascinating because what I discovered researching it is, and we looked at, I was really lucky to travel to New Zealand after the Christchurch earthquake, New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, my hometown, Sydney, Nova Scotia, after the Floodsgiving, they call it, the flood that happened on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Um, to talk to members of the community there. And unfortunately, what has happened is a lot of relief and development organizations, God love them, are run by religious institutions, which hasn't always had the friendliest relationship with the LGBT community.
Yeah.
Many of them are evangelical Christian. So, um, not all, but some. They're very clear about their goal, which is conversion. They're very clear. Look on their website. They're very open and
Uh,
honest about what they do and why they do it. So they're there to quote unquote save souls, which there's no price too high to pay for that. So regardless of the wrath, it uh, wreaks on the local LGBT community, as long as they're saving the souls of the people in Haiti after the earthquake. So it was really
wow.
sad to see in many of the places we went, these individuals are the lowest strata of society, and now they're just lowered again because it's not uncommon for the evangelical churches to blame the natural disaster on the LGBT community. We get back to Sodom and Gomorrah, and this is God's punishment. And the
Really?
gentleman we interviewed in Haiti, yeah, this is very
Wow.
common. In New Zealand, it happened. And then, of course, the community turns on them. So they're already very disenfranchised in society, and now they're blamed for the earthquake. So the guy we interviewed in Haiti actually tried to commit suicide because his uncle died, and he was very religious, and he believed it was his fault that the earthquake happened. At the same time, these were some of the most inspiring, motivated, passionate individuals I ever met. So I
Hmm.
almost feel like, here I am, living openly, married in Toronto, belonging to my gay swim club, and my big issue is, oh, practice got changed an hour tonight or got canceled. And, the guy we talked to in Haiti was like, uh, it was not safe for him to be seen openly gay anywhere. And yet they have a thriving gay community in what they're able to do and accomplish. And sometimes they get killed, and sometimes they get attacked and beaten up, and there's no one there to protect them. And this really sad thing about Haiti was, I mean, it does definitely had the Caribbean kind of machismo kind of
Yep.
culture,
Yeah.
but it was a French colony, slaves who freed themselves from their colonizers. So it didn't have that British colonial homophobic anti-sodomy history.
Hmm.
It was at one point, that's what they told me, one of the safest places to be LGBT because it didn't have all those anti-sodomy laws like Jamaica or all those other countries. So it was at one point, even though it was still dangerous, less dangerous than other Caribbean countries. And then now it's become one of the most dangerous because of all the evangelical Christians who came into the country. And really, I ended up, it's one of those moments where you're like, how did I end up here? We shot the last day there at the one of the biggest evangelical churches in Port-au-Prince. And I just thought I'm going to be killed. Like there was about 500, with
Scary.
all due respect, screaming, speaking in tongues, throwing themselves on the floor, Haitians going crazy. Like just, and my cameraman was just going nuts because the visuals were unbelievable. Like people like throwing themselves on the floor and running around, speaking like 5,000 people going crazy. And we had everywhere we went, we had an armed guard with us because it was so dangerous and they hate media for a whole bunch of reasons.
Hmm.
But we were invited to the church, and the at one point I was just sitting outside thinking I just need like 30 seconds just to gather myself because this is terrifying and crazy. And our security guard came out and said, "Oh, the pastor wants to see you." This is like the head guy of the church. I thought, okay, well, I'm dead now because I'm going to crucify me as he found out, he
Yeah,
Googled, somehow found out, like, been quite public online. And
of
I
course.
walked to the front of the altar, and there's like this sea of 5,000 people going crazy. And he said, "Oh, we'd like to bring you up on the altar as our visitor and kind of celebrate you here." Oh, I go up. The cameraman's like, "I want to get a shot of this," but they're all like dancing. The music is really good Caribbean music. So they're all dancing. So I'm like, okay, like I can't just sit there with my arms folded. So I got to kind of get into it and kind of dance a bit. And like, and I look out and I just see 5,000 people throwing themselves on the floor and screaming. And I thought, how did I end up here? One of those moments,
What
but
a moment. Oh my
it
gosh.
was
Like,
crazy. It was crazy.
and it's so, wow, you just shed a light on so much. I'm just going through my head. There's so many things going through my head as, of course, being
Mm,
part of the community too, is this, first of all, like, I never even thought of the linkage to natural disasters and how the pecking order of
mm,
the organizations that may be helping may not be interested in what becomes the lowest common denominator, and in this case, LGBTQ plus, which is I'd never even really even thought about this. Like it's so oh my gosh, it's so interesting, but yet disturbing.
very disturbing. Yeah, it's very sad.
Yeah, we're lucky. I always say you're lucky where you get born into, family wise, as well as where you grew up and things you experience,
Yeah,
because we could be somewhere else and have a whole different, like these poor individuals with some of these things that happen in their countries.
yeah,
Well, and people hear these stories and they don't think it's this now, right? Like these are
yeah.
happening
This
now.
was
This isn't
yeah. We
25,
just did
50,
it.
100.
Uh, no, this was like 4 years ago. I went to
Yeah.
Haiti. Yeah,
Oh my
5 years
gosh.
ago. 5 years ago.
Well, thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. And I think it's something that is interesting to talk about here as well as we think about the audience and the diverse nature of everyone that listens to this. Um,
Mm,
my last question, and then I'm going to ask you if you had any things that we didn't get to, but producer versus
mm,
reporter. Again, thinking
mm.
about careers and opportunities, and I know you're a seasoned producer. You've also held many roles as a reporter. Obviously, or maybe not, I don't know. Find the dynamics differ between the two roles, and do you have a preference and why, or is it similar? What's your thoughts if, and then
I
then
think
thinking about that, yeah.
Yeah, I think the key thing for me, I mean, I love both. I think the key thing for me, I hope, is that having done both roles, when I'm a producer, for example, I'm shooting an interview this afternoon with a reporter here in Montreal. Um, I'm producing the interview. If I was in that chair, I have a sense of what I would need for a good interview.
Uh,
So I try and deliver that to her, what she needs. Simple things like if her piece of hair is sticking up, like I would want to know that. So um, she's very patient with me, but she has sometimes flyaway hair. So I'm like, sorry, Jen, can I just smooth your hair over? Or, your collar is sticking out, or just stupid things like that. Like, because I don't want to shoot an interview that I think is brilliant and then go to watch it back. And the whole time I got a big piece of hair sticking up or whatever. Like, I always put a glass of water by her chair, or because if my throat gets dry, it'd be nice just to have something like,
sure.
or afterward, I'll listen to the interview. And if there's a part that she missed, I'll say, she says at the end, is there anything else? And I'll say, actually, just that little part where she said, blah, 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 can you follow? Oh, yeah, great. And then she can. So I'm always a second set of ears. And same for me when I'm on camera, I don't want to have to think about, is my hair sticking up? Is there a glass of water? Did I ask everything? Is there anything else I missed? Like, it's nice to know that I've got someone on the side to help me do my job as best I can. So I think that's what I learned. The benefit of doing all those different positions is when you're not doing them, you have a sense of what I can do to help somebody do the best job they can. So that's kind of what I've learned as I mean, I'm a big fan of unions. I come from a region of the country where unions have done really important work. I've never been part of a union. So I've had the benefit in some ways of being able to do lots of different positions from behind the camera, in front of the camera. And I just think the benefit of that is just I have a sense of what everybody needs in all those different roles and how I can help deliver that.
That makes sense. And I think that's how I always talk about, like when you can walk in different shoes of people,
Mhm.
it makes you that much better and more understanding of and empathetic
Exactly.
about different things,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
No, it's a great thought. Um, wow, what a powerful discussion, Kevin. I just had
Oh,
so
thank you.
much fun diving into the world of Kevin and
Oh,
understanding
thank you.
more about your experiences. And thank you for all that you do. I just want to give you an opportunity, though. Is there anything that I didn't touch upon that you might want to share with the audience, thinking that comes to mind, or yeah, anything else that you had as far as any closing thoughts?
I would say the only thing it reminds me of my first job review when I was at Vision TV with Rita Deverell. And at the end of my first year, she said to me, how do you think you did this year? And I said, well, I think I did okay. I didn't make a lot of mistakes. She said, oh my God, never say that. And I was like, what? And she goes, the only way you're going to learn is to make a mistake. And she was a great mentor. And she said she was head of journalism at University of Regina. She told me a story of a young woman, very talented, very smart, could have had a wonderful career, and she could not make a mistake. And Rita said, I sat down with her, I had so many meetings with her that said, the only way you're going to learn is no, journalists can never make mistakes. We always have to have our facts right. We always have to do it. And I think the end, Rita said she dropped out because she'd just come so paralyzed with failure
Mm,
that she could never. And Rita said, the only way you're going to learn is to make a mistake. Don't make the same mistake over and over and over and over again.
right, learn
That's
from it.
not good. Learn from it and move forward. And I think, you know, I still struggle with that on a daily basis almost, like, we have at W5, obviously, a lot of the stories we do can be quite litigious. And,
Hmm.
and I've had I've had several occasions where I call someone up and say, "Hi, it's Kevin O'Keefe from W5." I didn't do anything, like, because we have the reputation of going after rather governments or large corporations that may not be treating people very well.
Yeah.
Um, but so we have a legal review of many of our stories. We have a fact check, which is a whole separate element of our stories. And in daily news, I know the same thing applies. And your reputation of accuracy is really, in the end, the only thing you got going for you, because there's so much opinion journalism, if you want to call it, on the air right now, where people can just go on Facebook or Instagram and give their opinion on an
Hmm.
event, air quotes, an opinion, um, of what's happening with no factual basis whatsoever. And that video goes viral and millions of people see it, and it's wonderful and celebrated, and it's all lies. So I think we feel a lot of pressure to get it right.
Hmm.
Having said that, there are times where you might not get it right. And it's not that you didn't get it right that's the issue. It's how you're going to deal with that. How you're going to accept that for whatever reason, uh, that person didn't say that information accurately, and it fell through the cracks of our fact check, and it fell through the cracks of our lawyer. Um, and there's lots of ways to fix it. You can recut the story. You can put a disclaimer, or you can put an apology on the air. Or, there's a whole host of ways that media organizations handle that kind of thing. But to your advice to your listeners is you really got to accept that the only way you're going to learn is by making mistakes and not be afraid. So the flip side of that is don't be afraid to make mistakes, because that's the only way you're going to try new things and go put yourself out on a ledge and maybe shoot it this way this time, or maybe we want to try a different style of shooting, or maybe we want to tell the story in a different way than we've never told it before, or whatever. And it's like, oh shit, like, I hope my boss likes this.
Yep.
But I have to work in an environment where that's encouraged. And okay, it didn't go well, didn't work out the way you wanted to. You're never going to make that mistake again, but good for you for at least trying, because that's the only way that we're going to learn. So I
Yeah.
really want to, yeah, if I can just emphasize that to your listeners, that just trust that you're going to make a mistake, many mistakes in your life. You will survive, you will move forward, it'll be okay, and you'll learn a lot from them.
Great, great, though. Great closing thoughts and great reminder on the idea of making mistakes and learning, and so much appreciated. Thank you again. It means so much to have you here and
Well, thank
taking
you.
time out of your busy day to be part of this with myself and the listeners. I thank you so much, Kevin. It's been a pleasure meeting you and getting to know you better.
Happy to do it. Everybody likes to talk about themselves. That's what I believe. So I
I
enjoyed it a lot.
Oh, well, thank you so much. So, for the listeners, if you liked what you heard today, please share this podcast with your network on Spotify. Give us a rating, and also don't forget to follow Coffee with Convery on Instagram. This has been Coffee with Convery, and until next time, please stay well.